I have the pleasure to briefly talk to Anna Fechner. You present a very interesting, controversial paper on routing algorithms and for mobility platforms. Maybe you can summarize briefly what is the main finding and what it makes it so controversial.
Yes, the main finding was that different routing platforms display different travel times. So if I have a look at routing service A for a certain route from A to B, I get probably 20 minutes with public transportation, and a different service would provide me with a different routing travel time. So what is our concern is that if there is discrimination on routing platforms between different transportation modes, their mobility in cities could be influenced. So if people choose different transportation modes because of the information they get, that could change the mobility or influence the mobility in cities. And with the actual debate about climate change, about climate-friendly transportation modes, this is very interesting for cities, and I think they should look into that and create awareness because the individual is not a controlling body. I cannot, as an individual, look at all the platforms and on a daily basis.
But I mean, the real interesting part is something we actually know is that the platforms have a potential for discrimination. But in your paper, you show that that this is with a solid methodology that this is actually the case. So maybe you can say a few words about the methodology, because I'm sure you will be criticized for the methodology before you will be criticized for the findings.
Yeah, so what we had the pleasure to have some floating phone data, and with that we created for Berlin and Hamburg, two cities in Germany, mobility patterns. And what we did, we took these mobility patterns and created 10,000 origin-destination pairs. So these origin-destination pairs we then query in service routings. So we ask the routing services for these 10,000 pairs to give us routes for car and for public transportation. And what we found was that our average travel duration was very similar to other studies shown for these cities. So we think that the mobility pattern we created is quite realistic. And the interesting thing about the finding that was for the car routing, the results were very similar between these routing service platforms. But for the public transportation, there was a significant difference of nearly 6 minutes, which is in a city quite a lot of travel time.
So where would you go from? I mean, you have two cities, you have 3 routing platforms. Where would you go from here? I mean, you already said the interest is really for the cities because it's about urban planning, using of public transport, in stranded investments, things like that. Where should we go in terms of, or where would you recommend to go in terms of further research?
Yeah, I think what is important is, one, to answer the question, are people influenced by these kind of different information? So do people get influenced through this difference we showed? That is, of course, a basis for everything. The second would be, of course, to look into more cities to see, is it kind of an example for Berlin and Hamburg, or is it also existing in other countries with other platforms? We only have 3 platforms right now because we wanted to have platforms which show routing for cars and for public transportation, and a lot of routing services only show for one kind of transportation mode. So we are kind of limited there. So we have to see how to overcome this obstacle in further research. And I think a first step is create awareness, to discuss about it, to get into contact with local authorities, with city planners, how they also see that kind of view and what they would do with this kind of information, like asking for transparency perhaps, or creating local information that is based on the cities, then platforms can use to create perhaps better quality of data.
Yeah, so the potential is also in terms of regulation. Should we regulate? Who regulate? What regulate? Who are these platforms owned by? And is that influencing the results? So I think it's a great paper that sort of gives us a direction of future research. So thank you very much, Anna, for a very good paper.
Yeah, thank you
Good
very
luck.
much for having me.